All right, welcome back to the Soulburn universe. Today, I'm going to be introducing the concept of archetypal anatomy. And before I really dive deep into that concept and break down all the different layers, I want to answer two very important questions for you today. That first question is, what is an archetype? And then the second question, why should I care? Or why should you care? I'm first going to answer what an archetype is, and then hopefully by the end of this video, you will see the different reasons why you should care, as I would like you to come to that conclusion on your own, as opposed to trying to impose my beliefs on you. So, what is an archetype? The first key point that you must remember about archetypes is that they are symbolic compressions. So, if you take something like a zip file, if you've ever been on the computer and had a zip folder, where basically it's such a large folder that it needs to be compressed into a smaller form that contains the larger whole. And so basically, I load all these different things into a folder, I compress the folder, I send you the folder, and then you extract from that zip folder, and you now have all the information that was inside. An archetype is basically the zip. It is the zip folder, it is the compressed version of the contents inside of it. So inside every archetype is various different recurring patterns. That is the second thing to remember. Recurring patterns that are in recognizable form. So things that happen, again, I'm going to jump down to a couple examples here. If you look at the sovereign, which is one of the most important archetypes, we look at these different patterns or characteristics that all correspond to the same overlying pattern, which is governance, responsibility, authority, decision, and order. All these things, instead of trying to remember every single one of these things, you learn to associate these different ideas and concepts with the archetype that they are displayed through. And then now when I mention the sovereign, like embody the sovereign, channel the sovereign, or however you're going to use those words, you're now going to automatically register all of these different characteristics. So I'm not going to have to say, govern your life, hold personal responsibility, have authority over yourself, and make decisions and establish order in your life. I just have to say, channel the sovereign or embody the sovereign. Again, there's different ways that we can explain it. But yeah, basically, the sovereign is the zip compression folder, and then the governance, responsibility, authority, etc. are all the individual files within that zip folder. We move on to another example, the observer, one of my favorites. We have attention, perception, seeing, noticing. And what you will be able to distinguish is that many of these are very similar to each other. Like, what's the difference between perceiving something, seeing it, and noticing it? There is a difference, but they all correspond to the same underlying pattern, as I said before. So an archetype in its most simple form is a symbolic compression of recurring patterns into recognizable form that then becomes characterized, because we now look at the sovereign and just say your name, the sovereign, Nick the sovereign or Nick the observer, like you can attach personal characteristics to that archetype and you can make it your own, but they're still going to possess the same underlying patterns and the same underlying form. And that's going to allow you to take full ownership of these archetypes and to actually use them to improve your life versus them just being, mythological or symbolic representations of different ideas. Okay, archetypes appear across cultures. Why? We all experience the same things. We have a universal level of experience as humans. We all experience death. People die all the time. And a lot of times through life, you experience someone in your life that dies. Eventually, you're going to die. Okay, we experience love. We experience hate. We experience pain, suffering. We experience creation and creativity. We experience war and violence and crime and poverty and flourishing. We all experience varying different levels of the same universal constructs that permeate throughout all of civilization, from Canada to Asia. Wherever you are in the world, we all have many of the same experiences when you break the experience down to the most fundamental unit. Okay, so that's really why archetypes and archetypal anatomy is so important, because it unlocks a universal language that is almost buried under myth and under symbolism, because many people look at the warrior, like especially if you're a man and you're in the manosphere or anything like that, or militarized self-help, you look at the warrior and you're like, yeah, I want to be a warrior, discipline and hoorah and all that type of stuff, and it becomes almost romanticized. You're almost romanticizing yourself, comparing yourself to someone who actually goes off to war and kills people, whereas if you look at it from a more developmental standpoint, then we can see that every single archetypes holds various different characteristics that you yourself can actually apply to your life. And the whole point of archetypal anatomy is to actually show how many of these patterns and forms that are represented by these specific archetypes are actually essential and imperative to proper functioning and to your development and to your improvement and your flourishing in life. So that's really what the whole point of archetypal anatomy is to help you understand the various different aspects of, the archetypes so that you can apply them to your life wherever they are relevant. And also understanding that human beings hold multiplicity. We are multidimensional beings. So, like some people over identify, go back to the manosphere example for a second. A lot of guys over identify with the warrior and they forget to be a lover, or they forget to go to their job and be a craftsman. They forget to be a guardian for the people in their lives. And they forget to become an observer and notice their own internal patterns and loops and cycles and spirals and everything that we go through in everyday life. So the whole point of archetypal anatomy is to provide you with the insight and the understanding that there are over 100 different archetypes. And honestly, there's really an infinite number of archetypes, but there's over 100 that are fundamental to the human experience and human being in its existence. So if you can understand that every single archetype holds multiple layers of different functionalities and capacities and capabilities and skills and abilities and competencies and different things that you can literally apply today, like right after this video, you can apply these things. You can embody the sovereign, you can embody the observer, like right after this video or even during this video. And you can keep your attention focused on what I'm saying. That would be a function of the observer. So I really hope that you can see that symbolic compression of these recurring patterns. And then when we put them into a recognizable form, such as a character, and then we can even personalize by associating a name with them, a name that we come up with, or even our own name, that can unlock an incredible level of power and greater understanding of the universe and how human existence actually operates on a moment-to-moment basis, as well as over the stretch of eons. Okay, we already participate as many different archetypes. Okay, you might be the sovereign at 8 a.m. You get yourself to get out of bed. Maybe you go to the gym, you work out, you drink water, you eat healthy, you do whatever it is that you need to do to maintain sovereignty in those moments. Then you are the sovereign. You are the craftsman when you go to work. And even if you're not doing something technical with your hands, if you're creating something or building something or being a master at work, these are just different archetypes that we already embody on a day-to-day basis. You may be a lover at home, or you might be a guardian of the self, but it is a distorted embodiment or expression of that archetype to where you have walls up and you don't allow yourself to become the lover. So there's a lot of complexity hidden beneath the surface here, but my job is to bring those things to the surface and make sure that you can see them clearly so that you can efficiently and effectively implement these ideas into your life immediately. Okay, another thing I want to point out is that archetypes are developmental. So I used to look at archetypes as like static beings. Like I thought they were just characters and their ideas. That's the other thing I want to point out, is that they are not personality types. There's a lot of personality tests online that are archetypally focused, where it'll say like answer all these questions and it'll tell you what archetype you are or what archetypes you are most like. And sure, maybe it's beneficial in some way to determine which archetypes you show the most love to and that you participate as the most, but that doesn't paint the whole picture. As I said, there's over 100 different archetypes that you can embody on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. So an archetype is not a personality type. Okay, it is not a personality trait, although those may be influenced by the archetypes you frequently embody. So again, there's some complexity here, but just stay with me because this is literally just the first episode. I'm just skimming the surface here. And then, like I was saying before, archetypes are developmental. They are not static beings. They are not something that you just, pretend to be or become attached to at a symbolic level, but then like mythologizing your own life, even though you're not actually implementing or participating as those archetypes. You're just kind of retroactively assigning those characteristics to the things that you already do. Okay, and then we move down to the shadow light continuum. I'm not going to get too deep into what the shadow light continuum is because that is another session in and of itself, or another lesson, I guess you could say. But every archetype there is has a shadow and a light expression. Shadow basically means, well, it can mean various different things. It could mean repressed, suppressed, it could be distorted, it could be fragmented. There's various different ways that the shadow of an archetype can express. So if you look at the shadow version of sovereignty, that would be abdication. And abdication is basically relinquishing your responsibility over a certain domain of your life. So abdication would be like, I'm not going to get out of bed today. I'm just going to lay in bed and watch TikTok. And then conversely, it could go to the opposite end of the spectrum. More of an overly distorted expression of the sovereign would be the tyrant. You know, you're super rigid. Like, yes, you're disciplined, but discipline is all you do. You don't allow yourself to come out of the sovereign and go into a more loving type of archetype. So that is kind of how the shadow works. Usually there is an underactive expression and an overactive expression. Both of those would be some form of distortion. So it could also be associated with like an immature developmental level of access to that archetype. And then we have the light expression. Light is synonymous with integration and radiation. So not radiation in the term of like nuclear power, but radiation in terms of like exuding some type of, basically exuding, fully embodying, and maturely and in a healthy way expressing the key characteristics of whichever archetype you are embodying without allowing it to be contaminated by distortion or fragmentation, for instance. And Alex, I'm using a lot of jargon here. I'm really trying not to. These are just some things in this field that if you continue on this path, these things will start to make more sense. Just think about the shadow as being more distorted, whether it's an overactive expression or an underactive expression of the archetype, and light having to do with integration. So taking the healthy and mature forms of expression of whichever archetype that you are embodying and being able to integrate those with your moment-to-moment actions. Okay, and that's really it. I don't want to go too deep into this video because I feel like I've already said a lot so far and I don't want to overwhelm you, but just know, like, we're just scratching the surface. Everything I've just mentioned is basically smaller than a grain of sand on the beaches of our existence. So let's close off with a couple questions here. The first one is, what if archetypes aren't random? What if archetypes aren't random? And if you've been paying attention, then I gave you a little bit of time to answer or think about that in your minds. What if archetypes aren't random? Well, if you've been paying attention, then you already know they are not random. They are symbolic compressions and representations of recurring patterns that are ongoing in everyday life. And then what if archetypes belong to a larger structure? Think about those two questions. I know I kind of already answered the first one, but you're smart. I'm sure you already had that idea, 5 minutes into this video. So I hope you are as excited as I am to be going through archetypal anatomy, because, me teaching you and me coaching you on these things is also going to help me gain a better understanding of all these different aspects of archetypal anatomy. And that is very exciting to me. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Can't wait to see you in the next one.